You know the story of America, right? Land of the free, home of the brave, born on the 4th of July. We all learn it. But what if that's just the cover story? What if hiding in plain sight there's a completely different America, a shadow nation that plays by a very different set of rules? So the source material we're digging into today kicks off with this really provocative question. What if America's birthday is just wrong? What if the real date of its birth reveals a national character that's way darker and a whole lot more calculated than any of us were ever taught? So, you've got this tale of two Americas, astrologically speaking. On one side, there's the familiar July 4th chart that gives the US a Sagittarius ascendant, making it the eternal optimist, the explorer, always pushing boundaries. But the source we're looking at says the real birth was July 11th, 1776. And that one simple change, it flips the entire script. Suddenly, America becomes a Scorpio rising. It goes from a friendly explorer to a master strategist, driven by secrets and covert power. All right, so how do we even begin to unpack this? Well, the source material lays it out as an astrological autopsy. We're going to go piece by piece, looking at the nation's secret identity, its obsession with secrecy, how it uses money, its military strategy, its public mask, and then finally we'll see the creature that's revealed. All right, let's get into it. Okay, first up, this secret identity. With a Scorpio ascendant, the source argues that America isn't really the friendly explorer we think it is. Nope. Its true archetype is the sorcerer warrior. That's a nation whose primary instincts aren't freedom and exploration, but conquest, control, and pulling the strings from the shadows. So what does a Scorpio nation actually look like in the real world? Well, its lifeblood is power and secrecy. Its main tools aren't just diplomacy and armies, they're psychological warfare, economic warfare, black ops and secret budgets. Even the national symbol, the eagle, is reframed not as a bird of freedom, but as a predator that strikes from above. And get this, the whole system of checks and balances, the source interprets that as a government literally built on a deep paranoid fear of betrayal. Now we get to the real engine room of this whole theory. According to the source, the power behind this shadow state comes from this massive pileup of planets in the astrological 8th house. And that house, well, it's the natural domain of secrets, of spying, of taboos, and other people's money. A stellium is just a fancy word for a huge concentration of energy. And in this chart, the sun itself, the very core of the nation's identity, is parked right in this house of secrets. So the argument is that the government you see, that's just window dressing. The real power, the nation's true vitality, is hidden away with the intelligence agencies, the Federal Reserve, and all the covert operators who work in the shadows. And if you want a really chilling, real-world example of this energy at work, the source points directly to Project MKUltra. Think about it. The CIA's illegal mind control program is seen here as a literal manifestation of this chart. It's the state, operating in secret, trying to master, fracture, and weaponize the human mind itself. It's the 8th house in action. And it doesn't stop there. Take the FBI's COINTELPRO program. The source highlights that infamous letter sent to Martin Luther King Jr., the one that basically encouraged him to take his own life. Astrologically, this is seen as a perfect, if terrifying, expression of the theory. A secret communication, that's Mercury, designed to cause psychological destruction and even induce death, which is classic 8th house territory. Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about money. In this chart, you've got Pluto, the planet of coercion, of transformation, of absolute power, sitting right in the 2nd house of wealth and resources. The argument here is that the US doesn't see its currency as just a tool for trade, it sees it as a weapon for global dominance. And the source says you can see this pattern way back in American history, even in the words of Abraham Lincoln himself. This quote is presented as evidence for the tax thesis of the Civil War, the idea that the conflict wasn't just about morality, but that the primary driver was the cold, hard economics of federal tariff money. And here's where you can really see the strategy play out. The source frames the whole Fort Sumter incident not as a simple attack, but as a brilliantly calculated provocation. Think about it. The new tariff was killing the Southern economy. Fort Sumter was basically the cash register for collecting those tariffs in the harbor. So by sending a supply fleet, Lincoln essentially forced the South's hand. They either had to back down and pay, or they had to fire the first shot. They fired, and the North got to claim the moral high ground while protecting its economic interests. And according to the source, this isn't just ancient history. The same playbook, just modernized, is used today with what's called the economic hitman model. This is basically conquest, not with armies, but with spreadsheets and loan agreements.
You use predatory debt to trap other nations, and then you seize control of their valuable resources. This brings us to how this nation actually goes to war. The source identifies this recurring pattern, this doctrine, and the core idea is simple. You maneuver your enemy, you push them, you provoke them, until they strike the first blow. That way, you have the perfect justification for a massive, overwhelming retaliation. A prime example of this, according to the source, is the whole backdoor to war theory of Pearl Harbor. They point to something called the McCollum Memo. This was a real, internal document that laid out an 8-step plan specifically designed to provoke Japan into committing an overt act of war. And the final step on that list? A crippling oil embargo, which was basically an existential threat to the Japanese Empire at the time.
But if you think that's shocking, maybe the most extreme and, frankly, disturbing example of this whole doctrine is a declassified plan from 1962. It was called Operation Northwoods.
Now get this. This was a proposal, and it was unanimously approved by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to stage false flag terror attacks against American citizens on American soil. We're talking hijacking planes, staging attacks, even shooting civilians, all to be blamed on Cuba to justify a full-scale invasion. Now, President Kennedy shot the plan down, thankfully, but the source argues that the fact this idea was even conceived of, let alone approved by top military brass, reveals this dark strategic potential lurking deep inside the nation's psyche.
So, if the deep, dark core of the nation is this violent, secretive warrior, how does it present itself to the world? Well, for this, the source looks to a different part of the chart, Saturn, in the 10th house of public reputation. This is interpreted as the puritanical mask, a rigid, moralistic, almost severe public face that's designed to hide all the chaos churning underneath.
And this is where things get really weird. It creates this bizarre cultural paradox. You look at American media, and extreme violence, aggression, that's totally fine. It actually feeds that core Scorpio warrior identity. But sexuality, nudity, heavily censored. That's the Saturnian superego maintaining that puritanical public face. The source argues this conflict creates a kind of national cultural schizophrenia.
So what do you get when you put all these different pieces together? The warrior, the spy, the banker, the Puritan? According to this analysis, the true symbol for the United States isn't an eagle at all. It's something much stranger, much more complex, a chimeric hydra.
Let's actually look at the anatomy of this creature. It's got the scorpion's tail, right? That's the lethal force of the national security state. It has a fractured Gemini mind that can somehow hold opposing ideas like liberty and torture at the exact same time without conflict. Its body, its metabolism, runs on money and weaponized debt. And it wears that puritanical mask, a face of moral superiority, to hide its truly violent core.
Now this slide right here, this is where the whole theory really comes together in one place. You can see the clear lines the source is drawing, connecting these specific astrological placements directly to major historical events and national policies. From the Scorpio ascendant creating the national security state to the 8th house stellium giving us the CIA and MKUltra, it's all laid out. This is the blueprint of the entire argument.
And this theory even tries to look into the future. It connects another planetary placement to these secretive elite networks, like the ones exposed in things like the Epstein scandal, or talked about at places like Bohemian Grove. It even makes a prediction that a scheduled release of documents in 2026 won't be some kind of final judgment, but what it calls a scorpionic molting, the creature violently shedding its old skin only to be reborn in a new form. And that leaves us with the final, absolutely crucial question that this whole analysis builds to. As more and more of these secrets get dragged out into the light, is this creature, this hydra, just molting? Is it just regenerating into a new, more powerful form? Or are we actually witnessing its final death throes? The source leaves that for us to decide.
Okay, so I want you to picture something for a second. It's your birthday.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cake in front of you, candles are flickering, and everyone's singing that song we all know.
Right.
You have a very specific identity attached to that date, right? You check your horoscope, you read about your personality traits, and you kind of nod along because, well, that's you. You know who you are.
It's foundational. It is, it's the starting point of the self, your origin story.
Exactly. But imagine for a moment that I told you, you've been celebrating the wrong day. your entire life.
Oof.
And because of that, you fundamentally misunderstand who and what you actually are.
That is a deeply disorienting thought. It's an identity crisis in a box. But in the world of mundane astrology, which is just the technical term for the astrology of nations and states.
Right. The boring name for a really cool topic.
It is. In that world, getting the birth time wrong isn't just a matter of missed party invitations. It changes the entire diagnosis of the nation's character. It completely changes the prognosis of its future.
And that is exactly why we are here today. We're doing something a little different for this deep dive. We aren't just reviewing a book or, a single article. We are performing an autopsy, but not on a person. We are performing an astrological autopsy on the United States of America.
And the patient is very much alive, which makes the autopsy, well, it makes it complicated.
Very. We have a massive stack of research here, articles, historical data, astrological charts, and it all challenges the big one. The date everyone knows, July 4th, 1776.
Right. If you ask any standard astrologer, or really any American for that matter, they will tell you the U.S. was born on July 4th.
Of course.
And in astrological terms, that makes the country a Cancer sun, which is concerned with home, security, that sort of thing. But more importantly, it usually gives the chart a Sagittarius rising.
The Sagittarius rising. Okay, let's paint that picture first, because this is the myth we all live inside. What is the Sagittarius version of America?
It's the city on a hill. It really is. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, so it's optimistic, it's expansive, it's loud. It's the happy-go-lucky cowboy with a big grin.
Manifest destiny.
Manifest destiny is pure Sagittarius. It's the missionary spreading democracy because it genuinely believes it has the best system in the world. It's the hero in the white hat riding into town to save the day.
Which, let's be honest, is exactly how America likes to see itself. It's the Hollywood version of the country.
It absolutely is. But the sources we are diving into today argue that this is just the myth. It's the public relations. It's the cover story. The real birth chart, according to this deep dive, is based on a different moment entirely.
And it paints a much, much darker picture.
It does, because when you look at the actual history of the U.S., the wars, the espionage, the economic ruthlessness, the happy-go-lucky Sagittarius chart just doesn't fit the data. It feels like wearing the wrong coat.
So what is the real date then? What are we looking at here in this source material?
The source material argues for July 11th, 1776. Specifically at 4:42 p.m. in Philadelphia.
July 11th. Okay, that seems almost random. Why not the 2nd when they voted, or the 4th when they, put their names on the paper?
And this is a crucial distinction in mundane astrology. It's the difference between intent and manifestation.
Okay.
July 4th was the intent. It was a piece of paper signed by a group of men in a room. A powerful idea, but still just an idea. But the creature of the state, the actual living entity that the public interacts with, that the world sees, wasn't truly formed until the declaration was read aloud to the Continental Army and the public.
Okay, so it's like a Frankenstein monster doesn't come alive when you just sew the arm on.
No.
It comes alive when you flip the switch, lightning strikes, and it lurches up and walks out the door.
Exactly. That walking out the door moment, the first breath of life in the public sphere, happened on July 11th. That is the moment the entity actually stepped onto the world stage.
And there's another layer to this, which you mentioned gets a bit technical, but the sources say we have to unpack it because it changes everything.
It does. You're talking about the zodiac itself.
The sidereal thing.
Yes. The Fagan-Bradley sidereal zodiac.
Okay, break this down for me. I know my sign is, say, Leo or whatever, but I don't know what sidereal means.
So, most Western astrology, the kind you read in the newspaper, uses the tropical system. It's fixed to the seasons. The first day of spring is always the first day of Aries, no matter where the actual stars are in the sky.
It's a symbolic calendar.
It's a symbolic calendar, exactly. But the universe moves. The Earth wobbles on its axis like a spinning top that's starting to slow down. It's a very slow wobble, but it's there. We call it the precession of the equinoxes.
Right.
Over hundreds and thousands of years, the constellations appear to drift backward from our perspective. Sidereal astrology corrects for that wobble. It looks at where the stars actually are in the sky at any given moment.
So you're saying that where we think the constellations are isn't where they physically are anymore.
Precisely. There's about a 24-degree difference now. So if you looked up at the sky on July 11, 1776, and used the sidereal calculation, which maps to the actual constellations, the entire backdrop is different. The U.S. isn't a happy-go-lucky Sagittarius nation.
So what is it? In this system, what is the rising sign?
The United States has a Scorpio ascendant, specifically 19 degrees, 41 minutes of Scorpio rising.
Scorpio rising. Okay, even if you don't follow astrology at all, you know the vibe of Scorpio. It's intense.
It is the most intense sign in the zodiac. It's not the happy cowboy. It's the sorcerer. It's the spy. It's the detective. It's the strategist who operates from the shadows. And that is the mission of this deep dive.
Yeah.
We are going to look at American history, the espionage, the economic warfare, the Civil War, and even the massive data dumps we're seeing in this year 2026, all through the lens of this Scorpio chart.
And I have to say, just looking at the notes here, when you stop looking for a cowboy and you start looking for a scorpion,
Yeah.
the history books start to make a lot more uncomfortable sense.
It's like putting on a pair of night vision goggles. Suddenly, all the things that looked like random accidents or, terrible mistakes, they start to look like deliberate features of the organism, like they were part of the design all along.
So let's start there. Let's start with the skin of this creature, the ascendant. That's how the world sees us, right? Or at least how we project ourselves into the world.
It's the physical body, the mask, and the immediate instinctive reaction to the world. It's the front door of the chart. And if the U.S. is Scorpio rising, it is ruled by Mars.
Mars is the god of war. Simple as that.
Yes, but Scorpio is a very specific kind of Mars. See, Aries is also ruled by Mars, but Aries is the soldier who runs screaming into battle with a bayonet. It's hot, it's fiery, it's visible, it's loud.
Out in the open.
Exactly. Scorpio is water. Fixed water. Imagine a deep, still swamp. You don't know what's underneath. Scorpio is the sniper in that marsh. It's the strategist in the war room. It doesn't just want to conquer territory. It wants to get inside the enemy's head, understand its psychology, and transform its reality. It wants total control.
So it's a difference between a bar brawl and a surgical strike.
Or a silent coup d'etat. The source material uses this fascinating phrase, the sorcerer warrior. This chart suggests the U.S. operates like a predator striking from above, and the symbol they point to isn't just the scorpion, it's the eagle.
Wait a minute, the eagle is the national bird. That's on the dollar bill, the Great Seal, everywhere. Are you saying the eagle is a Scorpio symbol?
In esoteric astrology, yes, absolutely. Scorpio is said to have 3 stages of evolution. The scorpion, which crawls in the dirt, is reactive and stings. Then there's the eagle, which soars above, sees everything with a predator's eye, and acts with precision.
And what's the third?
The phoenix, the mythical bird that burns to death in a great fire and then rises from its own ashes, reborn and more powerful than before.
The eagle makes a ton of sense when you think about the surveillance state. The eye in the sky, drones, satellites.
It fits perfectly. The sources point out the U.S. government's massive and almost obsessive reliance on things with the word black in them. Black ops, black budgets, black sites.
Right, things that don't officially exist.
And what color is associated with Scorpio? Black. It signifies power that relies on not being seen. A Sagittarius nation would want to do everything in the open, broadcast it to the world, brag about its accomplishments. A Scorpio nation builds a $50 billion intelligence apparatus that, on paper, doesn't even exist.
That brings up the third stage you just mentioned, the phoenix. The whole idea of death and rebirth.
Right. And this is a core theme. Scorpio traditionally rules the 8th house of the zodiac, the house of death, crisis, taxes, other people's money, and regeneration.
Yeah.
If you look at U.S. history through this lens, the nation doesn't grow linearly, like a tree getting taller every year. It grows through cataclysms.
It molts, like a snake or a scorpion.
It molts, exactly. Think about the timeline. The burning of Washington in 1812, total destruction of the capital city, a national humiliation.
We almost lost the country right there.
We did. Then, the Civil War, the nation literally tore itself in half. 600,000 dead, brother against brother. The Great Depression, the banking system completely collapses. Pearl Harbor, a devastating military strike. 9/11, an attack on the homeland.
Usually we look at those events as, profound tragedies that we survived.
But the Scorpio chart argues that the state didn't just survive them, it fed on them. Look at what happens after every single one of those events. Does the state get smaller? Does it become less centralized? Does it get weaker?
No.
Nope.
After the Civil War, the federal government became supreme over the states forever. After the Depression, we got the New Deal, Social Security, the massive administrative state.
And after 9/11?
We got the Patriot Act, the Department of Homeland Security, the TSA, warrantless wiretapping.
Yeah.
The surveillance state went into overdrive.
Exactly. Every single time there is a massive national trauma, the state sheds its old skin and emerges more centralized, more powerful, and more militarized. The crisis is the very mechanism of its growth. The fire is what allows the phoenix to be reborn.
That is a really chilling way to put it. It implies the creature needs the crisis to evolve. It almost seeks it out.
And this chart suggests that paranoia is actually the foundation of the government structure itself. Think about the separation of powers. We learn about this in 5th grade civics class, right? It's this high-minded philosophical ideal about checks and balances.
Right, to prevent tyranny, Montesquieu and all that.
But look at it through the Scorpio lens for a second. Scorpio implicitly understands the corrupting nature of power because it is the embodiment of power. It trusts no one, not even itself. The founding fathers built a system based on deep, abiding suspicion.
I don't trust the president, so I'll give power to Congress.
And I don't trust Congress, so I'll give power to the courts.
And I don't trust any of them, so I'll give power to the state.
And I don't trust the people, so I'll create an electoral college. The entire skeleton of the U.S. government is frozen paranoia. It's a machine designed to watch itself, constantly expecting betrayal from within. That is a Scorpionic worldview.
So we have this Scorpio skin, this secretive, regenerating, deeply suspicious predator. But every ascendant has a ruler, right? Like a driver of the car. If Scorpio's the car, who was driving it?
Mars. As we said, Mars is the chart ruler. And this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of how this creature actually fights. In the specific July 11th chart, Mars is sitting at 4 degrees and 30 minutes of Gemini.
Okay.
And crucially, it is in the 7th house.
Okay, lay the map out for us. The 7th house is relationships. Marriage.
Well, in a person's chart, yes. Relationships, partnerships, and most importantly for a nation, open enemies.
So we have the god of war sitting in the house of enemies, in the sign of the twins.
You got it. Mars in Gemini. Gemini is an air sign. It rules communication, information, the lungs, duality, trickery, and logistics. When you put Mars, the planet of aggression, there, you get what the source calls the weaponization of duality.
What does that look like in practice? What is a weaponized duality?
It means the U.S. never fights with just one sword. It always fights with two. One sword is kinetic brute force, bullets, Marines on the beach. The other sword is information narratives, propaganda, logistics, intelligence, and spycraft. We call it hybrid warfare today, but this chart says it's been in the DNA since 1776.
The source uses a great phrase for this, the trickster general.
Yes, the trickster. Mars in Gemini is agile, it's verbal, it's morally ambiguous. It also suggests, and this is a key theme, that the U.S. creates twins or monsters that it inevitably has to fight later on.
Give me an example of that twin dynamic. That seems really important.
Okay, think about the 1980s. The Soviet Union has invaded Afghanistan. The U.S. wants to bleed them dry, but we don't want to send our own troops. So what do?
We fund the local fighters, the Mujahideen.
We fund them, we arm them, we train them, we provide the weapons, the Stinger missiles, the intelligence, the logistics. That is a pure Mars and Gemini operation. We create a proxy force, a twin warrior, to fight for us.
And then that force, led by guys like Osama bin Laden, becomes Al-Qaeda.
And we spend the next 20 years and trillions of dollars fighting the very thing we created. We fought our own twin. That is a classic Mars and Gemini dynamic. It's a reflection in the mirror coming to life and trying to kill you.
But the part of the section that really stopped me in my tracks, I mean, I had to read it twice, was this idea the source calls the doctrine of the first shot. The sources argue that because Mars is in the 7th house of the other, the U.S. has this deep, almost pathological need to be provoked. It rarely strikes first. Or at least it never looks like we strike first.
This is a crucial strategic insight that the chart provides. The 7th house is a reactive house. It's about how you respond to your partner or your enemy. This placement suggests the U.S. has a pathological need to frame itself as the victim in order to unleash its full violence. It maneuvers its enemy brilliantly into striking the first blow.
So we can always stand up and say, hey, they started it.
Exactly. We didn't want this war. That way, the massive, overwhelming retaliation that follows looks like righteous self-defense. It gives the U.S. the moral high ground, that Sagittarius mask we talked about, while allowing it to use its full Scorpio ruthlessness.
And we have a massive case study here that the source dives into really deep. Pearl Harbor. Now look, I know the history books, surprise attack, a day that will live in infamy. But the source material brings up something called the McCollum Memo.
The McCollum Memo is a smoking gun for this astrological theory. And this isn't some conspiracy theory from a dark corner of the internet. It's a declassified document from the National Archives. You can go look it up. It was written in October of 1940 by Lieutenant Commander Arthur McCollum, who was the director of the Office of Naval Intelligence's Far East Desk.
This was over a year before the attack.
Over a year, and it was an 8-point plan. plan, laid out very clearly, specifically designed to provoke Japan into committing an overt act of war.
Wait, he used those exact words, provoke and overt act of war.
Explicitly. The memo isn't about bombing Japan. It's about using Gemini logistics and second-house economics to strangle them. Point F in the memo, keep the main strength of the U.S. fleet in Hawaii.
Making it a tempting target.
A very tempting, concentrated target. Point H, institute a complete embargo on all U.S. trade with Japan in collaboration with the British Empire.
So it was an economic siege, a blockade.
This is where the astrology becomes almost chillingly literal. The strategy was to use second-house pressure resources, oil, steel, money, to force a seventh-house reaction open war.
The oil embargo, that was the final nail in the coffin.
It was. In July of 1941, the U.S. froze all Japanese assets and, most critically, cut off all oil exports. Now, Japan is an island nation. It has almost no natural resources. At that point, they had maybe 18 months of fuel left for their navy and their economy. It was an existential threat. They were being suffocated.
So they had a choice.
Yeah.
Wither on the vine and surrender their entire empire, or lash out violently to get the resources they needed to survive.
And the source argues this was the Mars and Gemini trap. You create a logical puzzle with only one exit, and that exit is war. You squeeze the resources until the enemy has no choice but to strike. McCollum knew that if the U.S. cut off the oil, Japan would have to seize the oil-rich Dutch East Indies.
And to do that safely, they had to take out the U.S. fleet in Hawaii first.
They had to neutralize the biggest threat in the Pacific. So the surprise wasn't that they attacked. The administration knew an attack was coming somewhere. The surprise was just the specific hour and the devastating effectiveness of it. The strategy was to essentially open the door, turn your back, and let them punch you in the head.
And it worked perfectly.
Yeah.
It overcame the powerful isolationist sentiment in the country, literally overnight. The day of infamy speech. That's Mars and Gemini. A masterful narrative of victimhood used to launch a global war.
A war that many in the administration had wanted for a long time.
It's brilliant in a terrifying way. But if you think that's dark, the second case study here is Operation Northwoods. This one. I mean, this one is genuinely hard to wrap your head around because it was us targeting us.
It is very hard to digest. But again, this is not speculation. This is a matter of public record declassified in the late 90s. The year is 1962. The Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest-ranking, most respected military officers in the land, unanimously approved a plan to stage terror attacks against U.S. citizens.
Against our own people, all to create a pretext for a war with Cuba.
That was the goal. The plan, codenamed Operation Northwoods, involved hijacking planes, blowing up U.S. ships in Guantanamo Bay. They even talked about a Remember the Maine incident, and orchestrating shootings on the streets of Miami and Washington, D.C.
My God.
They wanted to create a terrifying campaign of terror, blame it all on Fidel Castro, and then use the public outrage and grief to justify a full-scale invasion of Cuba.
We need a victim, so we will make ourselves the victim.
President Kennedy rejected it, thankfully. He was horrified. But the fact that the creature, the military and intelligence apparatus, conceived it, wrote it down in detail, and every single one of the Joint Chiefs signed off on it, that shows you the shadow of Scorpio rising.
It's the ultimate false flag capability.
It proves the state is willing to harm its own body, its own citizens, to achieve a geopolitical goal. It's the ultimate expression of the idea that the state is a separate organism from the people it governs. It has its own agenda for survival and growth, even if it has to eat one of its own limbs to do it.
And that organism has a brain. A very strange hidden brain. Which brings us to the next section of the chart. The source calls it the engine of the deep state.
This is the real core of the chart's power. The stellium, which is the astrological term for a big traffic jam of planets all in one place.
Huge traffic jam.
A massive one. In this chart, we have the Sun, Mercury, which is retrograde, the true node of the Moon, and Jupiter. And they are all piled up together in the 8th house in the sign of Gemini.
Okay, let's break that down piece by piece. We already know the 8th house is secrets, death, intelligence, and other people's money. We know Gemini is communication, duality, the mind.
So start with the Sun. The Sun in a chart represents the core identity, the vitality, the king, the president. If your Sun is in the 8th house, your true self is hidden. It operates in the dark. It isn't what it appears to be.
So the source argues this means the public government, the White House, the Congress, the guys you see on TV, that is just a facade.
It's the 10th house, the public reputation. But the real vitality, the sun itself, is in the 8th house. It's in the intelligence agencies, the Federal Reserve, the parts of the government that are not elected and are not transparent.
So the whole concept of the deep state isn't a conspiracy theory in this chart. It's anatomy. It's the solar plexus of the nation. It's where the heart of the creature actually is.
Exactly. The power resides in the classified sector. But then look at Mercury. Mercury rules the mind, information, communication. It sits right there next to the sun in the 8th house, and it is retrograde.
Retrograde means it appears to be moving backward from our perspective on Earth. Usually people say, don't sign contracts during Mercury retrograde. Communications get all messed up.
Right. In a mundane chart like this, Mercury retrograde in the 8th house is a signature for rewiring the psyche. It's about going back into the mind and deliberately changing the wiring. And the source connects this directly and explicitly to Project MKUltra.
MKUltra. The CIA's mind control program. I think most people have heard the name, but the details in this report they're just gruesome.
It's the complete fracture of the Gemini mind. The goal of MKUltra wasn't just interrogation or getting secrets. It was to see if they could split a personality, to create an alter.
The Manchurian Candidate idea. A programmable human assassin.
That was the fantasy, yes. The source highlights the work of a psychiatrist named Dr. Ewan Cameron. He was heavily funded by the CIA through a front company. He developed a technique called de-patterning.
It sounds awful.
It was. He would put patients, many of whom were just there for minor anxiety or depression, into drug-induced comas for weeks, sometimes months at a time. He called it psychic death. And while they were unconscious, he would play repetitive audio loops under their pillows for 16 to 20 hours a day.
What kind of loops?
Simple, destructive phrases. You are a bad mother. You have failed your family. You are nothing. You are nobody. It was a mechanical perversion of Mercury, using communication not to build up, but to erase a person.
They were trying to wipe the slate clean so they could write new programming on it.
That was the goal. It is literally weaponizing the Gemini twin archetype. Can we create a split personality, a secret self that can carry out orders and then have the primary personality forget they ever happened?
And because Mercury is retrograde, it also rules the hiding of evidence, right? The cover-up.
Correct. Retrograde energy is about reversal, review, and deletion. In 1973, when the Church Committee was starting to investigate CIA abuses, the CIO director at the time, Richard Helms, ordered all the MKUltra files destroyed, a retrograde action to erase the history.
So how do we even know about it?
We only know about it because some financial records, 8th house tax records, you could say, were misfiled and overlooked during the purge. That's the only reason this ever came to light.
That connects to COINTELPRO, too. The FBI's war on domestic dissent in the 60s and 70s.
That's the other side of the 8th house Gemini stellium, controlling the internal population, not just foreign enemies. COINTELPRO didn't just arrest people. They used Gemini tactics. Rumors, forged letters, whispers, psychological warfare.
The bad jacketing thing, I read about that.
Right. It was a viciously effective technique. You take a loyal, dedicated member of a group like the Black Panthers or an anti-war movement, and you plant rumors that they are a police informant, a snitch.
You plant the seed of doubt.
You plant the Gemini seed of doubt, and you let the Scorpio paranoia of the group destroy itself from within. It was brilliant, and it was evil. They didn't have to fire a shot.
And the Martin Luther King Jr. letter. I've seen this online. It's one of the most disgusting documents in American history.
The infamous suicide letter. The FBI sent Martin Luther King Jr. an anonymous letter pretending to be a disillusioned supporter. It detailed his alleged sexual affairs, again, using those 8th house sexual taboos, and it urged him to commit suicide before he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize to avoid public humiliation.
There is only one thing left for you to do. That's what it said. You know what it is.
That is Mercury in the 8th house in its purest, darkest form. It is communication designed to induce death. It's weaponizing the secrets of a person's private life to destroy their public standing and, hopefully, their will to live.
Which brings us right up to the modern day. Because now, we all willingly carry a surveillance device in our pockets. The source makes a fascinating point about a company called In-Q-Tel.
This is where the 8th house meets Gemini commerce and technology. In-Q-Tel is the CIA's official nonprofit venture capital firm. They find and fund promising tech startups that could be useful for the intelligence community.
What kind of companies?
They're an early investor in a company called Keyhole Inc. You've probably never heard of it, but you've heard of what it became. Google Earth. They also funded Palantir, the massive data mining firm. It is the seamless, almost invisible merger of spycraft and big tech.
So when we joke about our phones listening to us,
Gemini rules the ears and listening. The chart suggests the state feels it has an inherent right to listen to everything. The Edward Snowden revelations about the PRISM program, that was the 8th house sun, asserting its right to know all of your secrets for the sake of its existential survival.
it's not just about spies, though. It's also about money. You mentioned the 8th house as other people's money. But let's flip over to the 2nd house, the house of your own assets, the nation's wealth.
This is one of the most powerful and you could say most brutal placements in the entire chart. Pluto is in the 2nd house, in the sign of Capricorn.
Okay, Pluto. The planet of power, nuclear force, obsession, total destruction, and rebirth in the house of money and resources.
It means that for this entity, the dollar isn't just a medium of exchange. It's not just paper. It's a weapon of mass destruction.
Now that sounds like hyperbole. Money is money, a weapon is a weapon.
Oh. Is it? Look at the petrodollar system established in the 70s. The entire world is forced to trade oil, the lifeblood of industrial society, in US dollars. This forces every nation on Earth to hold US debt in their reserves to buy energy. It creates a structural dependency.
And if you try to leave that system,
If you, like Saddam Hussein in Iraq or Gaddafi in Libya, try to sell your oil for euros or a gold-backed dinar, you get the Pluto response: regime change, annihilation. Your country is bombed back to the Stone Age.
and the SWIFT banking system.
Exactly. The Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. It's the plumbing of global finance, and it's controlled by the US and its allies. Ejecting a nation like Russia or Iran from SWIFT is the modern equivalent of a nuclear strike. You can't get paid for your exports, you can't pay for your imports, you freeze their assets, you starve their population, you destroy their currency from the outside.
It's economic warfare.
It is strong-arm tactics using the very architecture of finance. That is Pluto force and
Right.
Capricorn structure in the 2nd house money. It's a perfect astrological description.
Now, this brings us to a really controversial historical take in the source material. And we need to handle this carefully because it's a sensitive topic. The Civil War.
Yes.
We are taught correctly that the Civil War was a profound moral conflict about the evil of slavery.
Yeah.
But this astrological chart and the sources analyzing it argue there was a Pluto in the 2nd house driver that actually pulled the trigger.
It's a heavy claim. And to be very clear, the source isn't denying the moral reality of slavery or the importance of the abolitionist movement, but it argues that the state's motivation, the reason the northern industrial state mobilized for total war, was fundamentally economic. It was a Pluto in the 2nd house conflict over money, fueled by that Mars and Gemini provocation we talked about.
Walk us through the economics of it.
You have to look at something called the moral tariff. This was a piece of legislation passed by Congress and signed into law by President Buchanan just a few days before Lincoln's inauguration in 1861. It raised tariff rates on imported goods to nearly 47%.
47%, that's massive. That's a huge tax.
It's astronomical. Now you have to ask, who does that help? It helps the North. The North was industrializing, they had factories making steel, textiles, tools. They loved high tariffs because it protected their nascent industries from cheaper, better British competition.
Who does it crush?
It crushes the South. The South was agrarian. They didn't have factories. They grew cotton and tobacco, which they sold to Europe. They had to import almost all of their manufactured goods. So a 47% tariff basically destroyed the purchasing power of the entire Southern economy overnight.
So the argument is,
The argument is called the tax thesis. At the time, there was no income tax. The federal government got almost all of its money from these tariffs, and the South was paying the vast, vast majority of those taxes.
so if the South seceded,
If the South successfully seceded and became a free trade zone right next door to the high tariff North, what would happen? European goods would flood into the ports of New Orleans and Charleston, not New York and Boston. The northern economy, that Pluto in Capricorn industrial structure, would collapse.
So Lincoln wasn't just saving the Union as a philosophical ideal. He was saving the federal revenue stream.
That's the argument from this perspective, and this is where Fort Sumter comes in. We think of it as just a military fort, but what was its primary function? It was a customs house. It was the cash register for Charleston Harbor, one of the busiest ports in the nation. By refusing to abandon it, Lincoln was refusing to surrender the tax collection point.
And the provocation. The Mars and Gemini move?
Lincoln announced he was sending a supply fleet to Fort Sumter. He even notified the governor of South Carolina in advance that the ships were coming. It was a brilliant, calculated move. He backed the Confederacy into a corner. If they let the ships in, they acknowledge U.S. sovereignty and they hated tariffs. If they fire on the ships, they start the war.
And they fired.
They fired. They took the bait. The South fired the first shot, and Lincoln got to stand before the nation and claim he was defending the flag and suppressing a rebellion, securing the moral high ground, while the primary motivation from this chart's perspective was securing the second house revenue stream.
It's the doctrine of the first shot all over again, 1861 and 1941. The pattern holds.
It holds perfectly, and you can see it today with what John Perkins called the economic hitman model.
Yes.
You lend developing nations billions of dollars, you know they can't pay back, and when they inevitably default, you seize their resources, their oil fields, their water systems, their electric grids. It's predatory lending as statecraft. Pure Pluto in the second house.
Okay, I feel like we've been looking at the monster under the bed for a while now. We've covered the spy, the warrior, the ruthless banker. But what about the other face of America? The part that gives lectures on human rights and democracy and family values.
Yes, the 10th house, the public mask, the reputation, the face the creature shows to the world. In this chart, the 10th house cusp is in the sign of Virgo, and sitting right in that house is the planet Saturn.
Saturn, the taskmaster, the strict father, the planet of rules, discipline, and restriction. In Virgo, the sign of the virgin, of purity, hygiene, order.
This creates the great American paradox, the fundamental conflict in the nation's psyche. You have this deep, violent, sexual, obsessive Scorpio-Mars undercurrent, the id, you could say. But the superego, the public face we show the world, is puritanical. It's obsessed with rules, propriety, and being clean.
This explains the censorship thing. I've always wondered about this. Why, in America, can you show a person's head exploding in graphic detail on TV, The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, whatever, but you absolutely cannot show a female breast on network television?
Because the violence, the Mars Scorpio energy, feels natural to the national psyche. It resonates with the ascendant. It's an accepted part of the creature's nature. But the breast, nudity, sexuality, that violates the Virgoan purity of the public space, the 10th house. It's seen as dirty, unsanitary, or disorderly.
We are a weirdly prudish nation for a country that exports so much incredibly violent media.
The source compares the U.S. to Europe, which tends to have more Venusian energy. In much of Europe, they view sexuality and nudity as natural, but are horrified by graphic violence. We view sex as a sanitation issue or a moral failing, and we view violence as a legitimate problem-solving tool. It's a complete inversion.
And the source argues this repression has a serious cost.
It absolutely does. When you put a heavy, restrictive Saturnine lid on a boiling, obsessive Scorpio pot, it doesn't just go away, it explodes. The repression forces that natural sexual energy out of the public 10th house and shoves it down into the 8th house, the underground, the basement.
And
there, in the shadows, it becomes twisted, it becomes secretive, it becomes predatory. It gets entangled with power, money, and control.
Which, wow, that is a perfect, if deeply disturbing, segue to the final part of this deep dive, the recent future. The source material talks extensively about the January 2026 release of the Epstein documents.
Yes. This is where that last planet in the 8th house, Jupiter, comes into play. Jupiter is the great expander. It makes everything it touches bigger. It represents the aristocracy, the billionaires, the elite, the powerful, and it's sitting right there in the 8th house of secrets and sexual power.
So, according to the source, on January 30, 2026, we get a massive data dump.
Yeah.
3 million pages of documents.
3 million pages. That is the Jovian expansion in action. A flood of information, too much to handle. And what it reveals, according to this analysis, is a network, a Gemini network. It's not just about one bad guy on an island. It connects finance, technology, academia, and royalty.
The names mentioned in the source are heavy hitters. This isn't just speculation. They're citing specific documents.
They are. The source cites emails that were unsealed involving Elon Musk regarding so-called kung fu practice, which led to those very public, very bizarre spats with Reid Hoffman. It mentions Prince Andrew and the threat of compromising photos that would shatter the last remnants of royal dignity. That's a classic Saturn destruction event. The public mask of propriety, 10th house, is ripped off by an 8th house revelation.
And Steve Bannon, what's his connection?
The source mentions recovered audio recordings of him allegedly discussing the occult nature of financial control. And this is a key theme. The source argues that the elite use these 8th house transgressive rituals, breaking sexual and social taboos, as a binding agent. It creates a network of mutual blackmail.
The occult aspect. I know a lot of people roll their eyes at this stuff thinking it's just satanic panic all over again, but the report points to a very real place, Bohemian Grove.
Bohemian Grove is the literal manifestation of this chart's energy. Every summer, you have the most powerful men in the world, presidents, CEOs, media moguls gathering in a redwood forest in California to perform a ritual where they mock sacrifice a human effigy to a giant 40-foot stone owl.
The cremation of care.
Think about the symbolism. They are ritually burning bull care, the Saturnian burden of the 10th house, the responsibilities of their public lives, so that they can tap into the raw, amoral Plutonian power of the 2nd and 8th houses. It's a ritual that allows them to act without conscience in the world of power and money.
And the geometry of Washington, D.C. itself.
It's a talisman. The source goes into great detail about how the city's layout is not random. The streets, the monuments, they're aligned to specific stars that are significant in Virgo Spica Arcturus. It's a Masonic grid designed to focus and channel the specific astrological energy. The city itself is built to be a machine made of stone and intention.
So putting this all together, we are looking at 2026. We're looking at this massive release of secrets. The source calls this a scorpionic molting. Not a collapse, but a molting.
That's the most important takeaway from this entire deep dive. It's not the end of the U.S. We shouldn't look at the chaos of the 2020s or the Epstein drop as the death of the nation.
Because Scorpio doesn't die. It just transforms, it regenerates.
Exactly. The creature is shedding its old, rotting skin. But the crucial question is, what is the new skin going to look like?
The source suggests it's going to be, well, darker, less hidden.
The phrase they use is nakedly Plutonian. The mask is coming off. The difference between the public face, Saturn and Virgo, and the shadow reality, Scorpio-Pluto, is collapsing.
No.
We are moving toward a surveillance empire where the power is overt. They don't need to hide the microphones anymore because they've convinced us we need them for our own safety, and they know we can't stop them anyway.
It's like the Hydra. You cut off one head, and 2 more grow back, stronger than before.
The chimeric hydra, as the report calls it. A chimera is a monster made of parts from different animals. This creature has the scorpion's tail, the national security state, the Gemini mind, the fractured, all-knowing intelligence apparatus, the golden scales of Pluto's economics, the weaponized dollar, and that old Puritan mask, which is slipping off its face.
It's a lot to process. It really, really challenges that whole red, white, and blue imagery we started with.
The report ends by saying the true colors of this entity aren't red, white, and blue.
What are they?
Black. For the 8th house, covert ops and the black budget that doesn't officially exist. Green. For the 2nd house, Plutonian dollar that rules the entire world. And gray.
Gray. Why gray?
The color of the moral ambiguity of Mars and Gemini. The fog of war. The gray zone between truth and fiction where the state truly operates and thrives.
Wow. Okay, that is a deep dive. We started with a birthday cake and we ended up with a chimeric hydra.
That's the power of looking at the shadow chart. It doesn't show you the country you were told you live in. It shows you the machinery under the hood.
So here's the question we wanted to leave you with, the thing to think about. If this chart is the true blueprint, if the nation you live in is fundamentally wired for crisis, for secrecy, and for ruthless regeneration, what does your role look like in that system? Are you just data for the Gemini mind? Or is there a way to navigate the belly of this beast without being digested?
And as we watch the events of 2026 and beyond unfold, don't ask, why is this chaos happening? Ask, what is the creature becoming next?
On that cheery note, thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one. Stay curious.
Stay safe.